Hi, everyone. Welcome to our session, Making Vendor Partnerships Work for You. I know we're up against a few other events. It's the end of a long day, and we are standing between you and drinks. So we really appreciate you joining us today. We're excited to chat with you. I'm Courtney Hampson, and I'm a program manager on Google's education team. And today I'm joined with some of our higher education partners and Andrew from Box. We're going to be sharing about some of the partnerships that we've developed. At Google, one of the most important things that we can do is get feedback directly from our customers. There's nothing more valuable to our product team than sitting down and hearing feedback firsthand, watching people use our products in person. So there are a number of ways that we do this, from online forums to visiting customers in person and forming groups like advisory boards. We have a number of advisory boards that we've formalized, including a K-12 board, higher education, and enterprise. And two of our panelists today are members of that higher ed customer advisory board. So today we're going to be sharing about how we form these relationships, how we leverage them to get benefit for both the vendors and for the participants, and give some tips on how you might start similar relationships with your customers at your companies. So the format today is a panel. We'll have a couple prompts up on the screen and allow our panelists to answer them. And then we've saved a lot of time at the end for you all to ask questions, so we encourage you to get up to the mics when we finish. We also have a Dory enabled for our session, as you might have seen in some other sessions. If we don't get to those questions today, we will respond to them by leaving comments back in. So feel free either during this session or afterwards to add comments in there if you weren't able to ask your question live. So for introductions, we'll kick it off with Ian.
Hi, I'm Ian Crew. I'm the architect on the team at UC Berkeley that runs a lot of the cloud collaboration services for our campus, including both G Suite and Box.
Hi, everyone. I'm Andrew Keating, Managing Director for Education and Healthcare at Box. Box is an enterprise cloud content management company, and we have a team, and this is the team that I'm on, that focuses on specific strategic industry verticals. And so I'm going to be sharing some perspectives on how we do that, how we structure our advisory boards, and how we engage with folks like Ian and Nick and other higher ed community members and customers.
And so I'm Nick Young. I'm at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. My current role is Enterprise Analytics Architect, but before that I ran the group that managed all of our cloud services, so Google, Box, Canvas, WebEx, all that kind of stuff. But now I'm focused on enterprise event monitoring, analytics, data-driven decision-making, all of that stuff, all of the cool buzzwords that you're hearing a lot about here at the conference this week.
My name is Zach Yeskel. I am a product manager on the G Suite for Education team, and my job is to bring the best of Google to students and educators, both G Suite, so I advocate for our users across all of G Suite's products and across Google. So we work with YouTube and Google Search and others to make sure those products work well for education. And then we also build products that are designed for education, like Classroom, Course Kit, and some features in other products.
Thanks, everyone. So let's dive in. First, we'll start with what should a vendor do and not do?
So I think the major thing for a vendor is to really listen. I think that understanding what the needs of the individual organization are and what the vertical is really critical. And the first meeting or three would be best if the customer is maybe doing 90% of the talking. And I'll say specifically, for example, in higher education, yes, we are our own vertical. We're also just about every other vertical out there in terms of doing healthcare or housing or retail or food service or whatever else it might be. We do all of it. And to have somebody come in and not understand that slows things down a whole lot. In terms of not doing, two things come to mind. One is proposing a solution that would require a radical reinvention of our large amounts of our business processes, or at least not proposing that without understanding that that will require a large reinvention and what that would take. And also for us, licensing models that require large amounts of demand aggregation and internal chargebacks or that sort of thing add levels of overhead that just make life really painful, and it's something that we dread when we hear it.
So I agree with a lot of what Ian just said. I would add to this also that I think it's important from the vendor perspective that successful vendors take a customer-centric approach and way of doing business. And we've seen this trend across the board in IT. It's incredibly important that vendors sort of put the customer first and put the customer at the center of what they do and how they work and operate. I would add on to that by saying it's also important to think strategically about the industry vertical. And so when it's higher ed, as Ian mentioned, understanding the uniqueness and complexities of universities and of higher ed, but you could extend that out to every other industry as well, because there's going to be nuances and there's going to be distinctions associated with every industry that's important to understand. For higher ed specifically, that also manifests in engaging at community scale. So looking at things like the higher ed cloud vendor assessment tool, and as a vendor, stepping up to that. So stepping up to compliance requirements that are required by an industry. In terms of what not to do, when thinking about higher ed and working with higher ed, I think, not coming in and expecting homogeneity, not expecting everything to be exactly the same within a campus environment, and not expecting there to be a rigid or tightly controlled IT stack or one way of doing things that can be prescribed. And I think, again, this is probably true in some other industries as well.
Yeah, so I'm going to say the same thing, right? As I agree with everything they've already said. Zach's going to be in a bad spot when it gets to him, but to kind of add some kind of different examples or different slants on it a little bit is, vendors should be kind of upfront and transparent about what their mission is, what their culture is, what problems they're actually trying to solve. It's not a good thing when vendors kind of sell on one idea and then after a year or so you figure out that that's not actually what their core business is, and not what they're spending time on actually developing or kind of improving. So it's important to kind of have that level of transparency. The other part is being upfront and kind of transparent again about their level of engagement. So Google and Box are large companies, and Box is a large company, and Google's a large company. But if you're dealing with a Google or a Box or a kind of a large multinational, you might get a different level of engagement because of their staffing levels or something like that. But then again, if you're dealing with kind of the mom and pop shop down the street, you might get very personalized, kind of walking into your office and talking to you every couple of days kind of thing. So depending on which vendors you're dealing with and from a vendor perspective, what they should do is just be honest about what their level of engagement is going to be. Are they able to give you a dedicated CSM? Are they able to have check-ins? Are they able to kind of have those discussions with you? Or is that just not something that they're kind of staffed at doing, or not something they've kind of prioritized? So yeah, there's a couple of things.
So I obviously agree with all of that, but I think I'll focus on how maybe we've made some of that actionable on our team. So yes, we want to listen and understand, but how do you actually do that? For us, what I always tell the team is to leave the office and spend time with your users. It's easy to live in our bubbles, and it's hard to really observe people in their context, in their environments, and understand them, and really empathize with them. You can only do that if you're actually feeling their pain and witnessing it. The other thing that I always tell people is you have to be really proactive to do that. So we had a very proactive program manager on our team who talked to 125 customers in her first couple months on the job, and all those insights then flowed back. So I think it's once you go out, then you have to share back with the rest of the organization the learnings that you've gained. In terms of what not to do, I think we're all smart, intelligent people with the best of intentions. But if we do things without checking them with our actual customers, we're liable to do the wrong thing. So whenever we get into a heated debate at work, it's always like, wait, let's actually put this in front of customers and have them help resolve it for us, because they always know what they want, and we can only assume.
Thanks. The only thing I'll add is I think there's a tendency to think that it's someone else's job to go out and talk to customers. Every person can make that their job, and it's a lot easier to do than you think. Calling up a customer, asking them if they want to meet with you, you'd be surprised how much feedback they've built up that they are willing to share. So even just taking those first steps and being proactive about setting up time can be helpful.
And I'll just add that the more opportunities you give your customers to give you feedback, the more feedback you'll get. So, not just going on site visits, not just calling them on the phone, not just having your team talk to them, but, having as many opportunities in the product to give feedback, having as many in-person interactions at conferences, et cetera. Like, the more you can do, the more ways you can give feedback, the better.
Thanks, everyone. So on the flip side, what should a school or a customer, whoever's engaging with that vendor, what should they do or not do?
So I think one thing that I always really appreciate from our customers is when we always ask them, or we ask them to be conduits to their whole organization, not just to be individuals. And so obviously there's a vast diversity of people, different roles in every organization, and we want the opinions of our advisory board, but we also want to hear from everyone else in the organization. So helping connect us to those people is really important.
Sure. So, building on what some of us already said is one of the things that a school should make sure they do is identify exactly what they want before kind of engaging with a vendor, or at least at the very start. Like I think Ian said, the first meeting should be a lot of the customer talking, or the school talking in this case. So putting some time into figuring out what problems you're actually trying to solve ahead of time is going to save a whole lot of heartache and issues later on down the line, because there's going to be less kind of surprises and less things where you run into it where you realize you're not aligned with what the vendor is actually trying to provide. The other thing that's very specific, and for us, having done it for years, it's kind of obvious, but you need to assign kind of a point of contact with the vendor. It's a relationship that has to be kind of cultivated and maintained. And you'll see, unfortunately, too frequently that nobody is kind of taking that on as their individual role. So there's no kind of tracking of milestones or things that have to actually be done, action items, things like that. It's kind of left to a group, or it's left to some manager who they're managing all kinds of stuff, versus actually pointing at somebody and saying, this is your relationship, you are the point of contact in between, you're responsible for keeping up with all that sort of stuff. In terms of not doing as well, the school shouldn't expect a vendor to be something they aren't. Again, reiterating what I said kind of from the vendor side of things, schools also shouldn't go to a vendor thinking that they're going to be the right thing for them and kind of putting that extra kind of expectation on them if the vendor isn't the one that's the right solution for them. So, the vendor shouldn't be trying to be something they aren't, and the school shouldn't expect them to be something they aren't as well.
So in terms of what customers should do, and specifically university customers, I think first and foremost to provide that feedback, but going a step beyond simply providing the feedback and telling vendors what you need, to really phrase the feedback in the form of a user story or a business case, even to explain the why of a particular feature's importance, a particular need, and really explain the context and give the full and complete picture out of that. I think another thing that customers should do, especially in this cloud world that we're living in, is to push on cloud vendors of all sorts for openness and for integrations. So one of the things that higher ed joint customers of Box and Google should be especially proud of, and we had some joint customers in other industries as well, is really pushing on our two companies to work together. And so you see things like the G Suite integration into Box that came out as a result of that. And that was really customers speaking up, pushing on both of our companies to say, hey, you guys should really work together, you should integrate, and then everybody gets the benefits out of that. In terms of things that customers should not do or refrain from doing, it's kind of the inverse of what I just said. I think it's not helpful to kind of complain just for the sake of complaining. It might be helpful to vent and let off some steam, but in terms of influencing a vendor, just complaining for the sake of complaining doesn't really get that far. And then in higher ed and for industries where there is a highly collaborative nature, I think it's really important that individual universities and individual customers don't undermine the community by looking out only for themselves. So to really have that kind of community mindset in terms of what they do is something to kind of avoid, only looking out for yourself.
And I'll second Andrew's point about providing user stories, not just solutions. So for example, you don't want to say, make all of these buttons blue. You might instead want to say, a lot of our users are red-green colorblind, so having one button green and one button red makes life difficult, because vendors may come up with a solution that you hadn't even considered, and if they really understand where you're trying to go. Another thing I'll say, again, talking about some of the more collaborative industries such as higher education, but really if you can do it at any point, to try to help a vendor understand why the thing that you are asking for isn't just for you but would benefit all of their customers. And if they can really understand why that is going to be a benefit to everybody, really that will help your case in terms of getting something onto the product roadmap. Similarly, I'll actually steal a phrase that Nick likes to use a lot, which is putting more wood behind fewer arrows, to really be careful about prioritizing your requests, so that when you're talking with a vendor, they can really understand what is truly important to you versus what is something that might be nice to have, but it isn't as important. And then finally, specifically talking to my colleagues in higher education, don't expect everything for free, because these services do cost real money to provide, and certainly the deep discounts and the free items that we do get from various players in the industry are wonderful, but I think we have to be cognizant that a company that goes out of business by giving away everything for free provides, well, not very good service.
Thank you. How do you measure if things are going well for the partnership?
I think one of the big ones is if we see things that we have suggested actually showing up in the product. That's a really key thing. And then also just increasing, as we build up reputations for being a good partner, the result of that is often increased access within a vendor's organization, where you end up with meetings with the teams that are actually building the products or maintaining the products. Again, in higher ed, where we tend to be pretty collaborative, we even sometimes see nice things like, well, Google said that you guys know a lot about how to do this, so they suggested we call you. Again, that's a really good indication that things are going pretty well.
Yeah, so on the cloud service provider side, there are a ton of different metrics, right? And commercial organizations, publicly traded companies like ours, revenue, bottom line, sales, all of that is important. But I think what it really comes down to is adoption and use of the product, right? In the cloud subscription world, there's no such thing anymore as shelfware, right? I mean, you don't just buy software and have it not be used, right? If you're a cloud service and you don't have active usage on a daily basis, on a weekly, on a monthly basis, then ultimately that subscription's not going to be renewed, the customer's not getting any value out of it, the users aren't using it. So I think bottom line, it comes down to adoption as the key tool. And with every service, there's different subcategories underneath adoption of various features and functionality and whatnot. I would also say that active engagement, and so we've mentioned a bit about the advisory boards that Google has, that Box has, getting customers to give their time and effort to come to join those meetings, to travel in some cases, is really a signal that things are going well. And that active engagement really extends beyond, it extends to all levels of an organization. So if you have a CIO advisory group and you've got a C-level executive who's giving up his or her time to come and meet with you, that's significant, and that's a measure of success.
Sure. So for some things that are really specific, obviously, support tickets and things like that. If the partnership's going well, then you should, in theory, see less support tickets that are kind of systemic and things that kind of haven't been acknowledged by the vendor, or you don't know what the result of what the answer is to them, things like that. I mean, there'll always be bugs, there'll always be little issues, things like that. But if there are things that are kind of systemic and the partnership is going well, then you should actually be able to kind of respond to those things and try to head those off and get those kind of communicated back and have a back and forth to figure out what the best way is to solve those things. Roadmap accuracy is another thing. Kind of in terms of, are you being surprised by things that the vendor is doing? If the partnership is going well, there's open channel for communication, and communication obviously underpins a lot of what we're talking about up here. But if the partnership is going well, you should be able to measure it by, are you being surprised by things that are kind of causing undue impact? If a new feature rolls out or something like that and it breaks everything, then did you know about it ahead of time? If the partnership's good, you should have probably heard about that well in advance of when it came out, or at least as soon as the vendor was able to kind of make that publicly available, or if you can sign an NDA or something like that to get kind of early access to roadmaps. That's a good way to kind of measure, do you have those kind of open channels of communication? So you're not, you're at the end of the day, so that your users aren't unduly impacted.
So one of the things that we have to face is like which partners we spend which customers we spend a lot of time with, and a couple of the ways that we choose which customers will be on our advisory board, which customers we're going to invite to our betas, is who we have the most open lines of communication with, who we have the healthiest dialogues, where we can really have a healthy debate and be honest and transparent. I think the folks that are also raising their hands and volunteering for the alphas and the betas and giving a lot of feedback in those forums are always the folks that are actually contributing feedback are the ones that we want to work with the most. And then I think the third thing that we always look for is customers that are willing to be advocates with other potential customers, with other existing customers, and really help us scale and collect feedback from a much wider variety of folks, not just from their individual institution.
All right, we've got a choose your own adventure here. So a couple of options. What have you done to strengthen the relationships with your customers or vendors that you work with? What could be improved, and what's on the horizon that might continue or begin to help?
I'll take the last one. Because I always like looking forward. I think there's a lot more we can do to work with our customers from the start. And so on the education team, we've started doing a lot more design sprints with our customers. We're at the very beginning of the product lifecycle. We have one coming up next week. We have 15 college students coming to spend a week with us, where we really are going to go deep and do a whole design thinking exercise with them about a new product area that we're interested in. So that's one. We're doing hackathons with our customers. We're on an standards advisory board that I think is really important. So we're like engaging deeply in the standards community alongside our higher ed customers. So I think the more ways that we can work with our customers from the beginning to create the future of collaboration that we want, the better. The other thing I'll say about on the horizon is we recently made a change to our advisory board to expand to hear a lot more voices in the community. So instead of just having CIOs, CTOs, and IT admins, we've now expanded to include students and professors, instructional designers, learning staff, and I think having even working groups for different kinds of users that we can pull in to different sessions has been really helpful, and I'm excited to do a lot more of that to make sure we're really understanding all of the voices.
Sure. So some of the things obviously we've done at UNCG is we participate on advisory boards, and we actually take those very seriously, and we make sure that we're putting the time into it. And like Zach was just saying, when there are opportunities for alphas or betas or feedback calls and things like that, we do our best to try and make sure we've got people available for those things. One of the things we're trying to do a better job of is kind of identify our testers, our kind of alpha, people who are willing to kind of be on the bleeding edge of stuff, so that we can put those people in touch with vendors when there are opportunities. Because as kind of central IT, when say Google or Box or whatever says, hey, there's this new feature that we're considering rolling out, what do you think? Well, if it's something that's kind of tailored towards, say, faculty, we're not faculty in central IT, so it takes us a while to kind of gather up those faculty members to try and schedule them and tell them about what the relationship is and what the advisory board is to start with, and how they should kind of interact with the vendor or with Box in this example's case. And so having that kind of cohort of testers makes things really easy, because you can kind of just let them know, hey, there's another opportunity, go here, do that, let us know how it went. And then check back in on the advisory board side of things with the vendor or with Box and say, what did our users say? Did they engage? Did they do things like that? Some things that, as vendors, what you can do as well is, if you don't have an advisory board, and I don't think we've said it yet, but maybe consider starting one. It doesn't have to be a higher ed advisory board, it just needs to be a customer advisory board. A group of customers who are representative, who can kind of give you feedback. That's going to strengthen a relationship for those individuals who are on the advisory board, but also the ones that aren't. So how do you kind of connect the people who are not on the board with those representatives, so you can kind of funnel that feedback back and forth? That's a really easy way to kind of strengthen things between the vendor and the customer.
So I'm going to try to touch on all three of these, if I can get through everything. In terms of things we've been doing recently at Box to hopefully strengthen the relationship, we have a longstanding higher ed advisory board. They've been established about 8 years now. We recently expanded the size of that group and invited some additional customers into it. Had a very successful 2-day meeting back in February. So we've been looking at kind of how do we continue to grow and mature an existing advisory group relationship in higher ed that's been very successful. We've also looked at our customer success and post-sales engagement, and recently gotten some additional resources, some additional headcount. So we have more of our university customers than ever before that have named customer success managers, and we also have more of a vertical focus on the post-sales customer success team, which hopefully will address some of those kind of things that we talked about for vendors needing to do. We've already been doing a pretty good job of it, but I think there's always room to improve. And so on that question, we're looking at ensuring that the experience is consistent across all of our customers, whether or not they have a small deployment, medium size, or large scale deployment. And that's an area where we're really taking a hard look at that. There's always going to be areas of kind of feature functionality enhancements, new integrations, things like that, where we can improve the product. And so that's something we're kind of looking to continually improve as well. And then, last but not least, what's on the horizon, our Box Higher Ed community has its 3rd annual community summit that's coming up, and Nick and UNCG are teaming up with Duke University to host that in June. We'd really like to get more universities than ever the past few years participating. We've had a couple of great events over the years, and so this is something that will hopefully contribute to ongoing dialogue beyond just the advisory board group, but to actually bring in a broader cross-section of higher ed customers. And we do similar things in other industries and in other geographies, so that's something that is always going to be on the horizon for us.
And I actually wanted to start with both starting a relationship and strengthening one. So if you aren't known to a vendor very well, or don't have a lot of visibility, and how do you get started with that relationship? And really, I think it's about getting involved in any way that you can. So if they're looking for volunteers to participate in a beta program, stick up your hand, provide good feedback on that beta program. If they have a forum, start getting involved on the forum and answering questions, and be one of the more visible and active contributors there. That will get noticed, that will get responded to and get you more access. If there is a regional meeting, show up, talk to people, get to know people. Another one is, give positive feedback, not just negative feedback. Vendors are people too, so I think. So I think really being careful to acknowledge when something really went right really helps make some progress there.
Thank you. Any final thoughts, takeaways, any last minute advice? We'll give a couple minutes to this and then we'll allow for questions at the mic.
So I think two things. One is I really truly believe that that a relationship like this can be a win-win situation, that it can really benefit both sides of the relationship. I don't think it's necessarily a cost center or something that is a burden on either side of the relationship. The other thing is actually a much bigger directional thing, which is that IT, I think, is really moving in a direction where we need to be partners both to our constituents within our different organizations, and visibly partners and visible differentiators and beneficiaries to the various directions of our institutions, but also partners with the vendors that we work with and being those conduits. And I think that's something that hasn't traditionally been IT. We've been sort of the wizards behind the curtain, keeping the machines running, keeping things going. But that more visible role is something that I really think we need to invest in our organizations, both in terms of personnel selection and skill building and training, and really supporting this sort of work.
So the move to cloud, which has been, I guess a decade or more now in the making, is really a paradigm shift. And it's something that requires a sustained and ongoing engagement from both the service provider, the vendor, and then also from the customer. So everyone needs to step up and participate in that on an ongoing basis. It's not simply a matter of, selecting a piece of software, installing it, and then everybody goes home, right? Until there's a patch or an update or something like that. This is a sort of daily basis where the technology is changing, and there needs to be a dialogue on an ongoing basis. What this also means in terms of moving to cloud is that all organizations need to embrace the idea of focusing on their core competencies, asking tough questions like, why should you run your own email servers? Why should you have physical hardware on premise? If it's not something that is, core to your mission and a differentiator for you, then you need to be seeking out the best of breed service providers, ensuring that they integrate and that they work together effectively. And so don't build it yourself. Seek out the best of breed, partner with them effectively, and manage and nurture that ongoing relationship.
So one of the things that we're trying to do more at our university is make the transition both internally and externally from just being kind of service providers of, IT provides services to being service partners, to being business partners. So trying to really understand the different areas of the university that, that need us, and how can we better help them, not by just kind of giving them a piece of software, but really trying to understand what are the problems they're trying to solve. That same thing applies to vendors as well. So we want to find vendors who want to be partners and trying to really understand what problems we're trying to solve, so we can kind of pick the right vendor and pick the right solution. Ultimately, that'll make for happier users and all that kind of stuff. The thing that as kind of a real final takeaway is, we've talked about kind of this, this is a relationship that needs to be kind of cultured and nurtured. There needs to be kind of intentional work done to kind of look back after 6 months or after a year or after 2 years or whatever the kind of contract length is, or however long your fiscal year, kind of fiscal cycles go, and really look back at the relationship and trying to figure out, is it still going well? How are you measuring that? But also, do you still have the same needs that you did at the start? So, you might have gone to, I think Andrew's example of, you might have offloaded, your on-prem email, for one reason, but 2 years later, that's all dead and gone. The people have forgotten why we went there. You don't know, necessarily why you're using a cloud vendor for email now. That means you need to kind of re-engage with the vendor who's now providing your email to figure out what are your needs now, not just what you needed 2 years ago. So really paying attention to kind of those questions and kind of ongoing kind of nurturing of that relationship or that partnership to figure out what are the things you actually need to be paying attention to, what things you're expecting the vendor to do for you, what things you need to do internally so you can have a better dialogue with the vendor to be more clear with them about what you're going to expect from them in years to come.
So I think our goal as vendors is to build the best possible product. Our customers' goals is to have the best possible product. And I think this feedback and this dialogue is the best way to achieve both those goals. And I think the feedback is a two-way street, right? It's not just like, give us as much feedback. Like, here's all these feedback channels. Thank you very much. Have a nice day. We have to, it can't be a black box. You can't just have a feedback place for feedback and never respond. One thing that's been really successful on the Google Classroom team is when you give us feedback and we act on it, we close the loop. We send you an email and say, we built the feature that you wanted, and we see users like posting pictures of that email on Twitter because it's pretty rare that a vendor actually says, thank you for the feedback, we did it, to like some teacher in Illinois that took the time to send the feedback. So acting on it, but then on the customer side also, it's so important to give thoughtful feedback and to put yourselves in the shoes of the vendor and help us understand the problems and really make sure that you're giving the right level of feedback so that we can understand your problems and help solve them with you, not just be prescriptive about what feature you need. So I think the feedback cycle is probably having a good feedback cycle as a vendor is an enormous competitive advantage, and I think it's something that requires a lot of time and energy to get right, but is totally worth it.
Thanks, everyone.